Hi, and welcome back to Sociology. This week and next week, we're going to do the chapter on crime and deviance. Today and this week is part 1. Now, when we watch the news in Canada, we are often informed of high-profile cases that then dominate the news cycle for a month or even years. In May of 2013, Tim Bosma was murdered and his body incinerated after leaving his home with 2 men who had arranged to test drive the truck that Bosma was selling and had recently advertised online. The 2 individuals, Dylan Millard and Mark Smitch, were accused and convicted of first-degree murder in the cases. In October 2010, Colonel Russell Williams pleads guilty to 88 charges. 2 of these charges were first-degree murder, 2 for sexual assault, and 2 for forcible confinement. His murder victims were Jessica Lloyd and Corporal Marie France Como. Dating back to 2007, Williams had broken into many homes and stolen women's garments and family photographs. He had also taken photos of himself at the crime scenes. The first-degree murder charges bringing with them automatic life sentence, no parole, no probability of parole, and a minimum of 25 years. In December 2007, Robert Picton, a farmer from British Columbia, was convicted of second-degree murders of 6 women and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. Rebecca Gunno, a sex trade worker, was first of 61 women who would eventually be placed on a list of women, mostly sex trade workers, who had disappeared mysteriously from the area over many years and were believed to be possible victims of Picton. A publicly commissioned inquiry into these disappearances identified inadequate police investigation, systemic racism, class and mental health biases, and under-resourced health, housing, and addiction services as contributing factors. Over the same periods of time between 2007 and 2013, numerous highly publicized corporate crimes, often referred to as white-collar crimes, took place in Canada. Examples include cases of 2 Calgary men convicted of running the largest Ponzi scheme in Canadian history that say thousands of investors were defrauded of between $100 and $400 million, with many losing their life savings entirely. Now, while overall rates of corporate crime in Canada remain somewhat lower than in much of the world, the annual PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Survey found that more than 1/3 of all Canadian organizations were impacted by corporate crime between the years 2013 and 2016, while simultaneously, systems to detect and prosecute such crimes were reduced. Sociologists are interested in examining diverse questions surrounding crime. Why did the police not pursue missing women's cases earlier? Why might they not have taken the concerns of the missing women's families seriously? Why are we so well informed about high-profile murders and yet we know very little about the effects of widespread corporate crime? Why do some victims garner more sympathy than others? Now, these are just a few of the questions that people are interested in when they study crime that they grapple with. And of course, many more behaviors fall outside of society's norms. Crime knows no boundaries. As we will see in this chapter, it is often about sick or deviant individuals, but rather it's connected to a wider social relations. So let's get started. All societies have norms to reinforce and help teach acceptable behavior. Deviance, any behavior, belief, or condition that violates a cultural norm. Now, as you can imagine, that's really relative. Not everything that breaches, a cultural norm is as serious as something else. An act only becomes deviant when it is socially defined as such. Definitions of deviance are varied very widely from place to place and from time to time and from group to group. It's not a uniform definition for everybody. Violations are dealt with through various mechanisms of social control. Systemic practices developed by social groups to encourage conformity might be one. Controls can involve socialization, that's how we are raised, or the use of negative sanctions, how we could be discouraged from certain things and encouraged to do others. So deviance is very relative. It varies from time to time. What was deviant in the 1920s may not be deviant today, and what is deviant today may not be deviant in the future. An act becomes deviant when it is socially defined as deviant. For example, members of a gang may shun mainstream conformity, yet they conform to the group's code for dress or other such conformity considerations. Deviance can be ambiguous. Good and bad definitions vary so much that sometimes it's difficult to consider what is deviant and what is not. Deviance varies with degrees. It ranges from mild transgressions of folkways, whether or not you brush your teeth on any given day or wear shorts in the winter, I do, to serious infringements of law, like murder. Some forms of deviant behavior are officially defined as crimes. Now we make a distinction. Now what's deviant isn't necessarily criminal. Crimes, these are behaviors that violate the criminal law and are punishable by fines, jail terms, and other sanctions. Now we're going to look at that topic in part 2. We will now review the sociological perspectives on crime and deviance, looking at our theorists. Remember, this is like looking through different sunglasses on the issues of, in this case, crime and deviance. Functionalists, they use strain theory, opportunity theory, and social bonding theory to argue that socialization, how we are raised or who influences our behavior, is core. It's the core value of material success without the corresponding legitimate means to achieve the goal. So they're saying many people might be socialized to participate in crimes and learn that just because you can't get it in a legitimate way doesn't mean you can't still achieve those goals. It accounts for much of the crime that's committed by people of lower income backgrounds, especially when a person's ties to society are weakened or broken. And we're going to start with strain theory. Goals and means to achieve them is essentially what the strain theory is. According to strain theory, and this is done by Merton, people feel strain when they are exposed to the cultural goals that they are unable to attain because they don't have access to the culturally proved means of achieving those goals. For example, that wasn't that long ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, it was, and sorry for the older reference, there's lots of others, where perhaps people were after certain elements. It used to be particular running shoes. People would, attack you and take your shoes, or a particular jacket. It's that, in this strain, you get strain when you witness and see other people have things that are socially acceptable that you can't afford or cannot get because of your circumstance. You may commit a crime in order to achieve those same outcomes. Subsequent reduction in Canadian taxes and an increased costs of cigarettes in the US dramatically cut the incidence of cigarette smuggling. But the networks and the expertise developed by the smugglers remained, turned into new commodities. They started doing drugs, alcohol, and firearms instead. Strain theory may also explain upper-class deviance. The pressure to increase corporate profits might encourage somebody in a white-collar environment to commit a crime in order to boost those profits. Now, the second theory by the functionalists is opportunity theory. Access to illegitimate opportunities for deviance to occur, people must have access to illegitimate opportunity structures, means illegally to achieve those goals. Circumstances that provide an opportunity for people to acquire through illegitimate activities what they cannot achieve through legitimate channels. So if I'm a child in a neighborhood where I don't have access, but I see older children with access from my neighborhood, I might find out from them how they are doing it and learn from them how I can do the same thing. Through the illegitimate opportunities, I can get them. The third one is the control theory. Here's social bonding theory. This theory holds that the probability of deviant behavior increases when a person's ties to society are weakened or broken. The main theme here is that deviant behavior is minimized when people have strong bonds that bind them to families, peers, religion, organization, and other institutions. So people in lower income feel and often experience less connectivity to the rest of society, so they may, as a result of being where they are, have less opportunity and less social control, keeping them in a good place. According to Hershey, social bonding consists of an attachment to other people, commitment to conventional behavior, school, work, and the like, involvement in conventional activities, belief in the legitimacy of conventional values and norms. Hershey found that commitment and attachment were really very most important in connecting to delinquency than involvement and belief. Now, the symbolic interactionalists, they use a differential association theory and labeling theory to explain how a person's behavior is influenced and reinforced by others. According to interactionalists, deviance is learned in the same way as conformity is. It's through the interactions with others. In other words, it's through socialization. So now let's consider the interactionalist theories for crime and deviance, and we'll start with the differential association theory, where it states that individuals have a greater tendency to deviate from societal norms when they frequently associate with persons who favor deviance over conformity. Well, it makes sense that if you're going to be around people who are deviant, you will likely learn and be more motivated by what motivates them. People learn the necessary techniques and the motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes for the deviant behavior from people with whom they associate. People are more likely to engage in criminal activity if they have frequent, intense, and long-lasting interactions with others who violate the law. Ties to other deviants, especially important to the world of organized crime, where the willingness of peers to stand up for one another can be critical in maintaining power in the face of violent opposition from competitors. The interactionalists also have a theory that they call labeling theory. And it suggests that deviants are those people who have been successfully labeled as such by others. The process of labeling is directly related to the power and status of those persons who do the labeling and those who are being labeled. There's two forms, if you will, there's two forms of this labeling. There's primary deviance and secondary deviance. Primary deviance is the initial act of breaking the rules. So you've gone along with your buddies and you've broken into the school and you've left. You've taken a few things and you've left. That's your primary deviance. The secondary deviance occurs when a person who has been labeled deviant accepts that new identity and continues their deviant behavior. So even if I got caught from doing that, I would continue to do more of that with the same people because I've started to identify myself with that deviant behavior and those people. So since this theory is looking at labeling, that suggests that someone or some people must be judges. Sociologists have coined the term moral entrepreneurs to describe this activity of defining what is deviant. Moral entrepreneurs could be people who use their own views of right and wrong to establish rules and label others as deviant. Moral entrepreneurs often create moral crusades, public and media awareness campaigns that help generate public and political support for their causes. Some of the examples can include, and they're not all positive, but they're not all bad, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the women's temperance movement of the early 20th century that resulted in prohibition, campaigns against abortion, prostitution, and child abuse. 2003 example of the Roman Catholic evangelistics, Muslim and Sikh leaders united against same-sex marriages. Or more currently, you could look at the Freedom Convoy as another example. Stigmatization labels can last a long time and make it difficult for a labeled person to reintegrate into society. Many of the provisions of the Youth Criminal Justice Act were enacted to reduce the impact of labeling of young offenders. Now we can touch on conflict theory. Now, conflict theory there focuses on who has the power to define, enforce, and punish crime and deviance. Conflict theorists suggest that people with economic and political power define what is criminal and any behavior that threatens their own interests. The powerful then use the law to protect their interests as well as control those who are without power. The laws are made and enforce the benefit of the capitalist class by ensuring that individuals at the bottom of the social class structure do not infringe on the property or threaten the safety of those at the top. So why do people commit crime? The marginalized commit crime in order to survive, not to become rich. Frequently, in the struggle for survival, marginalized persons victimize other marginalized persons. For example, violent gang activity may be a collective response of young people seemingly hopeless poverty. Law protects the interests of the affluent and the powerful, and not, as it's claimed, the common good. According to critical theorists, the affluent commit crimes because they are greedy and want more than they have. The poor commit economic crimes in order to survive. Living in poverty may lead to violent crime and victimization of poor by the poor. The feminists, most of the early deviance work specifically addressed male offenders. There was concern on the part of the female researchers that subsequent theory either could not be used to explain female deviance or that if used would reinforce existing female stereotypes, having a negative impact on both our understanding and our treatment of female offenders. The feminist scholars have concluded that the roots of female criminality lie in the social structure that is characterized by inequities of class, race, and gender. In effect, that women who violate the law are not criminal women, but criminalized women. Women's deviance and crime as a rational response to oppression and discrimination. They point to patriarchy that keeps women tied to family and home. So, for example, prostitution, women are more likely to be charged than are the men who look for prostitution. Women are exploited by capitalism and patriarchy because more women than men have low-paying jobs. Women tend to become involved in prostitution and shoplifting. New links between race, class, and gender. Frequently, visible minority women suffer abuse from home deviance and crime as an effect of abuse. deviance and crime as a form of resisting abuse. Now, the postmodern perspective, now from the work of Michael Foucault, he looked at his original thesis was prison controls the inmate, not by physical punishment, but by constant surveillance and the impact of that constant surveillance. It was coined the panopticon, which is a structure that gives prison officials the possibility to observe criminals all the time. Now, the evidence for what Foucault called the panopticon, computers being used for surveillance over subordinates in companies. Now, this does happen. It's just not something we see too often, but a toilet that can monitor whether or not employees using the toilets are using drugs. License plate cameras, facial recognition cameras, closed-circuit cameras in subways. I think that London, England has the most CCT cameras of any city in the world, a few million. The use of DNA in the future. When we look at the issues of crime and deviance, we've really just touched the surface in looking at, just by definition, and the views of what is crime and deviance. Now, this whole topic of crime and deviance is itself in a separate gen ed course. It's called criminology. That's offered in the winter. But we're just going to be looking at what's in our textbook, and I would really encourage you to read some of the breakout boxes. They have some very useful components to help us with each of these chapters. So I hope this has been helpful for you. We'll be doing part 2 in next week's class. All right, everybody. Bye for now.